Good morning. We're here in day 11 of our 30-day challenge. And day 11 is about the things that get in our way. Yesterday in our fellowship class, our fellowship group, we studied Matthew 26, Matthew 25, and we talked about Judas. Judas as a central character in the gospel and the betrayal. And the question that came up is what kind of Judas do we see in our lives? Because not every betrayal is necessarily a bad thing. And also not every betrayal comes from another person. Sometimes we betray ourselves. Sometimes the betrayal comes from within. And what if this whole story was symbolic? What if Judas represented the part of us that always betrays our higher self, the self that thinks eternally for comfort, fear, survival, approval, distraction, or just temporary relief? So today I want to refer to Judas as anything that trades our purpose for convenience. Because when we read the story of Judas, what he did was he traded Jesus for 30 shekels for money. And what did money represent? Status, comfort, approval, survival, and of course temporary relief. With money you can do all kinds of things. And Judas missed the meaning of having Jesus in his life. And some of us think that the enemy is outside of us, and we feed the very patterns that destroy our future internally. And sometimes you have to recognize that Judas is within. The Judas could be fear, like we said earlier, disguised as caution, procrastination, disguised as being patient or waiting on God, laziness. Some of us call we call it rest, but it's really laziness. People pleasing is a Judas. Insecurity is a Judas. Insecurity betrays us in all kinds of ways. You do things to please others because you're insecure. Addiction is a Judas. Addiction, when you're addicted to something, you're giving your power away. Excuses, and of course, the old identity that keeps trying to come back up. And what we see in the scriptures that we see in our lives is Judas is oftentimes close to you. Judas knows your vision. Judas knows your weaknesses. Judas knows where you go, where you sleep, where you're going to be. That's why it was easy for Judas to betray Jesus. He knew all of his secrets. Well, not all, but he was close enough to influence certain decisions. And so that intimacy, we read that the betrayal came with a kiss. And a kiss is, you don't kiss somebody you're not close to. And we look at our lives, what are the closest things that we look at, even some people, that we don't realize that they are betraying our future? And sometimes the greatest betrayals are not obvious. You might not see them. Jesus had the ability, the discernment to see it, so he saw it. So today is really about awareness and discernment. And we got to ask ourselves the questions. What are those things that are sabotaging our growth? And what keeps showing up right before you grow, right before you get to that next level? Hesitation has been a big theme. What keeps convincing you to hesitate after the decision has been made? You made the decision that you were going to buy the flight. You made the decision that you were going to rent the apartment or rent the office space. And now hesitation comes in. Some people believe that Judas was not just a villain, but he was a symbol of our lower consciousness that everybody has to confront before transformation. Because remember, without Judas, Jesus wouldn't have been crucified, at least to our knowledge. So before the resurrection, he was exposed, and Judas failed the test. And this is one of the reasons why so many people never become who they were called to be. Not because they lacked the vision, but because they kept feeding that thing that was betraying their vision. So there are things that you tolerate today, every single day, that betrays your future. Habits that sell your purpose for temporary comfort. Relationships, even thoughts. So what needs to die so that the next version of you can live? One fascinating thing that we addressed in our group yesterday was how Jesus treated Judas, knowing that he would betray him, knowing that he would offer him up in exchange for some gold or some shekels of silver, I believe it was. And Jesus knew all of this stuff, but he still moved with purpose. He still moved with composure, with wisdom, and most importantly, with restraint. So how do we treat the Judases in our lives? How do you treat that laziness? How do you treat the people pleasing? It doesn't mean you got to be passive, naive, or allow that destruction to stay in your life unchecked. But I think it means learning the difference between discernment and hatred. Learning the difference between having boundaries and having bitterness. And learning the difference between wisdom and revenge. And many people, they become consumed to destroy Judas instead of staying aligned with their assignment. And what does that do? If your assignment is to save the world, and you've identified a Judas, if you switch to trying to extinguish this Judas, what does that do for your assignment? If Jesus would have focused on exterminating Judas, it would have taken his eyes off the prize. So our job is not to eliminate the Judas, because remember, the Judas is there to actually help you fulfill your mission. But our job is to stay aligned with our purpose and to manage that Judas. Jesus didn't stop his mission to obsess. He stayed centered. And I think this teaches us something very powerful. Just because you have opposition doesn't remove your purpose. And sometimes the betrayal reveals what was already unstable in your life. Sometimes it exposes attachment. Sometimes it forces separation that requires the growth. And so the goal is not to be paranoid and start looking for every single Judas. No. Just be aware without losing focus, without losing your peace. And let's set boundaries without, showing hate. And let go. Let go without revenge. We have to be able to see clearly without becoming cynical. And protect your purpose. Protect your purpose without being resentful or hardening your heart. Because it means when you discover that Judas within you, you don't have to hate yourself. Because we've all betrayed ourselves before. Everybody is guilty of it, through fear, through compromise, through hesitation, through lack of discipline, through shrinking. So awareness is not supposed to produce shame. It's meant to produce transformation. So the mature response is not to hang yourself like Judas did, or to try to live in shame, but see what no longer aligns and choose differently. And Jesus has taught us that betrayal does not have to make you lose your identity. You don't have to become a Judas just because you encountered one. Betrayal exposes something within you that calls you to be your highest self. So today, let's look for those Judases in our lives and treat them with discernment, with wisdom.